The Apache girl whispered 6 words that should have sent any decent man running. I can't live without a man. But rancher Rhett Calder heard what she really meant, and it changed everything. When he found her beaten, broken, and left for buzzards under a merciless sun, he made a choice that would bring hell from 2 directions, her tribe wanting blood, and his town wanting her gone. This is their story of survival dignity and redefining what it means to stand your ground. Stay with me until the end and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat that August afternoon didn't just shimmer, it roared. Rhett Calder had been riding fence line for 6 hours, squinting through air thick as motor oil, when his mare stopped cold, her ears pinned back, nostrils flaring at something just beyond the creosote brush. Easy, girl. Rhett's hand went instinctively to the Winchester on his saddle. In this stretch of Arizona territory, a spooked horse meant one of 3 things: rattler mountain lion or trouble-wearing boots. What he found was none of those. She was crumpled against a lightning-split juniper like discarded laundry wrists bound with rawhide that had cut deep enough to paint the leather dark. Her dress, what remained of it, hung in strips that told a story Rhett had no stomach to imagine. Apache he knew immediately. The beadwork pattern, though caked with dust and blood, was unmistakable, but it was her back that made his jaw clench. Even from 10 feet away, he could see the lattice of whip marks, some fresh enough that flies had gathered. Rhett dismounted, boots hitting hardpan, with a crunch that seemed loud as gunfire in the desert silence. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Can you hear me?" Nothing, not even a flutter of eyelids. He approached slow, the way you'd approach a wounded animal, not from fear, but respect for pain's unpredictability. When he knelt beside her, his shadow fell across her face, and he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. Alive. Barely. The knife came out of his belt with a whisper of steel. The rawhide bonds parted with 2 quick cuts, and her arms fell limp. Her pulse, when he found it at her throat, beat weak and irregular as a dying watch. "All right," Rhett said, though she couldn't hear him. "All right, we're gonna get you sorted." Getting her onto the horse took every ounce of gentle strength he had. She weighed nothing, starvation had seen to that, but her body was rigid with trauma, and twice he had to stop when she made sounds that weren't quite conscious, but weren't quite not. Finally, he got her settled across the saddle, one arm secured around her to keep her from sliding. The ride back to the ranch took 90 minutes that felt like 90 years. Every jostle made him wince for her. Every time her head lolled against his chest, he adjusted his grip, trying to cushion the worst of it. The mare, bless her, seemed to understand, picking her way across the rough country with unusual care. The sun was kissing the horizon when the ranch house came into view, a squat adobe structure with a sagging porch and a windmill that squeaked with every turn. Home, such as it was. Rhett carried her inside, kicking the door open with his boot heel. The interior was sparse, widower sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a stove that had seen better decades, and a bed in the corner that hadn't held a woman in 3 years. He laid her on that bed now, pulling the rough wool blanket over her, with hands that suddenly felt too large, too clumsy. His water ration for the week sat in a ceramic pitcher by the washstand. He didn't hesitate, pouring half of it into a bowl and dampening a cloth. Cleaning her wounds was delicate work. Each pass of the cloth revealed new damage burns from what looked like a brand, bruises so deep they'd turned black cuts that would scar even with perfect care. Rhett worked methodical, the way his late wife Sarah had taught him when he'd come home with lesser hurts. Clean outward from the wound, never press, let the water do the work. "Who did this to you?" he muttered, knowing no answer would come. "And why?" When the worst was cleaned, he lit the stove and got coffee going, more from habit than need. The cabin filled with its bitter aroma as darkness settled outside like a dropped curtain. Rhett pulled the other chair onto the porch, Winchester across his lap, and settled in for night watch. The desert after dark was a different creature entirely. Coyotes called in the distance, their yips and howls carrying strange and in the thin air. Once something larger moved through the brush. Near the corral, possibly a javelin, possibly something else. Rhett didn't bother checking. His attention stayed fixed on the middle distance where the trail from town cut through the scrub. A rider coming from that direction wouldn't be bringing good news. The cigarette between his fingers had burned down to his knuckles. When he heard it, a sharp intake of breath from inside. Then a crash, the ceramic pitcher hitting the floor. Rhett was through the door in 2 strides, rifle up but not aimed. The woman Nalin, though he didn't know her name yet, was on her feet, or trying to be. She'd grabbed the stove knife and held it in a white-knuckle grip, blade point trembling toward him. Her eyes were wild, not quite seeing him, seeing someone else, seeing everyone who'd hurt her. "Hey." Rhett stopped cold, set the Winchester against the wall with deliberate slowness. "Hey, you're safe here." The knife didn't lower. "Door's right there." He nodded toward it, the hands coming up slow, empty, non-threatening. "It's open. Your choice. You want to leave, you leave. You want to stay, you stay. But nobody's gonna hurt you here." For a long moment, the only sound was her ragged breathing and the wind testing the shutters. Then, almost imperceptibly, the knife began to lower. Her legs gave out and she sat hard on the bed, edge blade clattering to the floor. Rhett stayed where he was, giving her space, giving her time. "Water's on the table," he said quietly. "Food in the cupboard if you want it. I'll be outside." He was halfway to the door when she spoke. "I can't live without a man." The words stopped him cold. They were so quiet he almost missed them, but they carried weight, the weight of confession of truth too heavy to hold alone. Rhett turned slow, meeting her eyes for the first time properly. They were dark, almost black, and held a depth of experience that made his 3 decades feel like nothing. "Ma'am, I can't live without a man," she repeated, and this time the rest came with it. "One who doesn't hurt me." The silence that followed was profound. Rhett felt something shift into his chest like tectonic plates finding new purchase. Not attraction, not yet, maybe not ever, but recognition, understanding. "Then you're in the right place," he said simply. "Take what you need. Rest. We'll figure the rest come morning." She nodded just barely and reached for the water cup with shaking hands. She drank slow, careful, like someone who'd learned that even water could be weaponized. Rhett watched her take 3 sips, watched her breathing start to even out, watched 2 separate rhythms begin to find a common tempo. Then he returned to the porch, to his chair and his watch and his Winchester, and waited for dawn. It came sooner than he wanted, and later than she needed. Rhett woke to the sound of hammering, his own hammering, because he'd started work before the sun fully cleared the mountains. The wheelchair was a rough thing, cobbled from spare lumber and wagon wheels he'd never gotten around to fixing. But it would roll, and that was what mattered. "What is that?" He looked up. Nalin stood in the doorway, leaning heavy on the frame, but standing nonetheless. Her hair, cleaned of blood and dust, fell past her shoulders in a dark cascade. The dress he'd found, one of Sarah's old ones, fit poorly, but covered the worst of the damage. "Thought you might want to get around," Rhett said, driving another nail home. "Can't have you trapped in bed all day." She moved closer, limping but determined. "I can walk." "Didn't say you couldn't, but conserve your strength for what matters." He set down the hammer and met her eyes. "This is yours if you want it. If you don't, I'll use it for hauling feed sacks." A ghost of something, amusement maybe, or approval, crossed her face. "Show me how it works." So he did, explaining the basic mechanics, the way the wheels could lock, how the armrests could support her if she needed to stand. She listened with fierce attention, asking questions about leverage points and weight distribution that surprised him with their technical precision. "Where did you learn carpentry?" she asked. "My father." "Where'd you learn physics?" "My grandmother. She said women who understand how things work can't be convinced they don't work at all." Rhett smiled at that, couldn't help it. Wise woman. She was. Past tense. Another story there, but not one for now. He stepped back, giving her space to approach the chair. She circled it once, twice, testing the wheels with one hand while keeping the other on the door frame for balance. Then, decision made, she lowered herself into it. The wheels turned smooth under her hands. She rolled forward 3 feet, stopped, rolled back. Forward again, this time in a tight circle. Her movements grew more confident with each rotation. "I can do this," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Never doubted it." She looked up at him, then really looked, and Rhett saw something he hadn't expected: calculation, assessment. She was measuring him, testing the boundaries of this strange sanctuary she'd found. "You said I owe you nothing." "That's right. No debt here. None." "Then what do you want?" It was a fair question, loaded but fair. Rhett leaned against the porch post, considering his answer with the care it deserved. "Help around the place, if you're able. Conversation, if you're willing. Nothing, if you're not." He paused. "Mostly, I want to know you're safe. After that, your choices are your own." Nalin nodded slowly. "Consent as house law." Didn't think of it in those terms, but yeah, that's about right. She rolled the chair to the porch edge, looking out at the ranch. The sagging corral fence, the windmill with its persistent squeak, the chicken coop that leaned like a drunk against the tool shed. Lots of work here. More than one man can handle, that's for sure. Then we should start. The "we" hit him harder than he expected. Rhett pushed off from the post and grabbed his work gloves from the hook. "Fence line needs mending. Posts rotted through in 3 places. I can haul water." She said it like a challenge. "Water's heavy. So am I when I need to be." They fell into a rhythm after that, Rhett digging post holes, while Nalin rolled between the water barrel and the work site, a bucket balanced across the chair's arms. It was inefficient as hell, but there was something fierce in her determination that made him keep his mouth shut about easier ways. By noon, they'd replaced 2 posts and started on the 3rd. Sweat had soaked through both their shirts, and the sun was doing its level best to cook them where they stood. Rhett was tamping earth around the new post when he noticed Nalin had stopped moving. She was staring at the ridgeline. "What is it, Ryder?" She pointed with her chin. "There, by the split rock." Rhett shaded his eyes, squinting into the distance. Sure enough, there was movement, a horse and rider too far to make out details, but close enough to be watching, close enough to have seen them working together. "You know him. Could be anyone. Could be everyone." Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. The voice of someone who'd learned to expect the worst, because the worst kept proving inevitable. They watched together as the rider sat for another minute, then turned and disappeared over the ridge. The dust from the horse's hooves hung in the air long after a question mark against the sky. "Word's gonna spread," Nalin said quietly. "Let it. They'll come. From town. From the tribe. Maybe both. Let them." Rhett drove the tamping rod down hard. "This is my land, my rules. Anyone doesn't like it can take it up with me direct." She looked at him with something that might have been hope or might have been pity. Hard to say which. "You don't know what you're inviting." "Maybe not." He wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "But I know what I'm refusing. That's enough." The first porch meal happened at sundown. Rhett brought out 2 plates, beans, hardtack, and the last of the salted pork, and set them on the rail. No table, no ceremony, just food and the fading light. They ate in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of 2 people learning each other's edges, finding where they fit and where they didn't. Nalin ate slow, chewing each bite like it might be her last. Rhett ate faster, more from habit than hunger. When their eyes met across the porch, neither looked away. It was a test. Rhett realized hers of him, his of himself. Could he look at her scars, her damage, her history, and see a person rather than a problem? Could she look at his kindness and believe it wasn't currency waiting to be spent? The answer for both of them seemed to be yes. "Tell me," Rhett said, finally setting his empty plate aside. You don't owe me the story, but if you want to share it, I'll listen. Nalin was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then she started talking. My husband died 2 winters ago. Fever took him in 3 days. Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact. The tribe said I should marry his brother. I said no. They said a woman alone brings bad luck. I said I'd rather be unlucky than owned. Rhett nodded, saying nothing. This was her story to tell. His brother didn't accept no. Neither did the elders who backed him. She touched her wrist where the rawhide had cut deepest. They said I was refusing tradition, refusing duty, refusing the natural order of things. So they punished you. They made an example. The distinction mattered, he could tell. 20 lashes, exile, instructions to any man who found me, do what you want. She's already dead to us. The casual cruelty of it stole his breath. And the brand, my husband's brother, so I'd remember who I belonged to even in exile. She said it without inflection, but her hands had fisted in her lap. He said I'd come crawling back, beg to be owned. That's what women do, he said. That's all we're good for. He was wrong. Yes, simple, absolute. He was. Rhett wanted to say more, wanted to promise protection, justice, retribution, but he knew those were his wants, not hers. So instead he said, "You're safe here, long as you want to be." Why? The question was genuine, searching. Why help me? You don't know me. Don't need to know someone to know they deserve better than they got. He stood collecting the plates. Besides, you're good with a water bucket. Hard to find quality help these days. It was a weak joke, but it landed. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but closer than he'd seen. Progress. That night, Rhett lay on his bedroll on the floor while Nalin took the bed. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house made him tense. Every distant sound pulled him halfway to waking. But it wasn't fear keeping him alert. It was responsibility. He'd made a choice today. Hell, he'd made several. Each one had felt right in the moment, but right didn't mean easy, and it sure as hell didn't mean safe. The rider on the ridge would talk. The story would spread. Apache woman living with a white rancher, and her tribe had cast her out. Town would twist it one way, tribe another, and the truth wouldn't matter to either. But as Rhett listened to Nalin's steady breathing across the room, the breathing of someone who'd finally found rest, he knew he'd make the same choices again and again. As many times as it took, the canyon between what was right and what was accepted had never felt wider. Rhett Calder had just chosen his side. Come morning, he'd learn whether he could hold it. The town of Dry Creek sat squat and mean under the morning sun, its main street a rutted affair lined with buildings that seemed to lean on each other for support. Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop outside Kendrick's general store, setting the brake with more force than necessary. "You can wait here," he told Nalin. "I can also come in." "I know you can. I'm saying you don't have to." She looked at him with those dark, measuring eyes. "If I hide now, I'll hide forever. That's not the deal." "Fair enough." Rhett climbed down and came around to help with the chair, unfolding it and locking the wheels before stepping back. Nalin lowered herself into it with practiced ease. She'd had 3 days to master the mechanics, and master them she had. The store's interior smelled of coffee flour and old leather. Kendrick stood behind the counter, his usual Tuesday morning greeting dying on his lips when he saw who Rhett had brought. The room wasn't crowded, just Kendrick, a farmer named Hobbs, and the sheriff's wife, Mrs. Patterson, but it might as well have been packed. The silence hit like a physical thing, spreading outward from Nalin like ripples in disturbed water. "Rhett," Kendrick found his voice first. This is Nalin. We need flour, coffee, and medical supplies." Rhett's tone invited no discussion. Mrs. Patterson's face had gone pale. "Is that the Apache woman, the one who was—" She caught herself glancing at Nalin with something between horror and fascination. "The one who's staying at my ranch," Rhett finished for her. "And we're here for supplies, not conversation." Hobbs, never known for tact, spat tobacco juice into the spittoon. "Heard she was exiled. Heard she was dying when you found her. Heard wrong on the dying part. Rhett kept his voice level, but his hand rested deliberately on the counter close enough to his belt, to the pistol there, that the gesture wouldn't be missed. Kendrick cleared his throat. Rhett, you know, I got no problem with your charity, but folks are talking. Deputy Voss came by yesterday asking questions. Let him ask. He was implying things about her, about you, about what you might be. I don't care what Voss implies. Rhett's voice had dropped to something quiet and dangerous. I care about flour, coffee, and medical supplies. You planning to sell them to me or not? The silence stretched. Rhett could feel Nayland behind him, could sense her reading the room, calculating odds and outcomes. He wanted to turn to reassure her, but that would be the wrong move. This wasn't about protecting her, it was about standing beside her. Finally, Kendrick nodded. Yeah, I'll get your order together. While he moved to gather supplies, Mrs. Patterson edged toward the door, suddenly remembering an urgent errand elsewhere. Hobbs stayed through his roomy eyes fixed on Nayland with undisguised curiosity. You speak English? He asked her directly. Better than you speak Apache, she replied, and Rhett had to bite back a grin. Hobbs blinked thrown. Touchy, ain't she? Honest, Rhett corrected. There's a difference. The bell over the door chimed, and Deputy Voss walked in like he owned the place, which in his mind he probably did. He was a big man, tall and broad, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once before whiskey and meanness had their way with it. His eyes found Nayland immediately. Something ugly crossed his features. Well. Voss's voice carried that particular drawl of men who mistake cruelty for authority. So it's true, Calder's got himself a squaw. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Deputy. Rhett didn't give Voss the satisfaction of seeing him react. We're conducting business here. You need something, or you just flapping your gums. Need to know what business you got harboring a criminal. Criminal. Now Rhett did turn slow and deliberate. What crime? Vagrancy, trespassing, take your pick. Voss hitched his gun belt higher, a gesture meant to intimidate. Her own people threw her out. That tells me all I need to know about her character. Tells me more about them than her. Rhett stepped forward, putting himself between Voss and Nayland. Now, unless you got a warrant, an actual warrant signed by an actual judge, you can see yourself out. Voss's face reddened. You're making a mistake, Calder. Bringing her here, parading her around like she's people. She is people. She's a... Finish that sentence, Rhett said quietly, and you'll be picking your teeth up off Kendrick's floor. Your choice. The threat hung in the air between them. Voss was bigger, younger, and wore a badge, but Rhett had something Voss lacked, the absolute certainty that he was in the right. That certainty was a weapon all its own. Deputy Voss looked between Rhett and Nayland, his jaw working like he was chewing words too bitter to spit out. Finally he turned and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. You're gonna regret this, Calder, both of you. Put it on my tab, Rhett called after him. When the door slammed, the remaining tension began to drain from the room. Kendrick finished wrapping the supplies with shaking hands, and Rhett paid without comment. As they loaded the wagon, Nayland spoke quietly. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. He'll come back with friends. Then we'll handle it. Rhett locked the last crate in place. You ready? She nodded, but her hands gripped the chair arms tight enough to blanch her knuckles. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing what had just happened, what it meant, what would come next. They were halfway back when Nalin spoke again. In my tribe there's a word, Nadu. It means the one who keeps breathing. Not living, not thriving, just breathing, surviving out of spite. She looked at Rhett. That's what I've been, since my husband died, since the exile, just breathing. And now I'm not sure. She was quiet for a moment, but it feels like something more. The ranch appeared on the horizon, small and weathered, but theirs at least for now. Rhett had never been good with words, never been the type to make speeches or promises he couldn't keep. So instead of responding, he simply drove on, steady and sure. Some things didn't need saying, some things just were. Back at the ranch, Rhett set to work on a new project while Nellen put away supplies. By evening, he'd finished a low workbench built to the exact height of her chair, with smooth edges and enough surface area for whatever she wanted to make of it. "What's this?" she asked when she rolled over to inspect it. "Figured you might want a place of your own, for working, thinking, whatever." He wiped sawdust from his hands. "It's yours." She ran her fingers along the wood grain, testing the smoothness, the stability. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, with something Rhett couldn't quite name. "Thank you." 2 words, but they carried weight. Not the weight of debt or obligation, the weight of genuine gratitude given freely. Rhett nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That night the wind came, not the gentle evening breeze, but a proper storm howling down from the mountains with enough force to test every nail and board on the place. Rhett was securing the barn door when he heard a sharp crack from the corral. "Top rails down," Nalen called from the porch. He could have told her to stay put, to keep safe and dry. But he knew she wouldn't, and more than that, he knew she shouldn't have to. So instead he grabbed 2 coils of rope and brought one to her. "You know your knots. My grandmother taught you, right?" He grinned despite the wind trying to peel his hat off. "Then let's get this sorted before the whole fence comes down." They worked in driving grit dust devils and debris, making every movement a battle. But Nellen matched him pull for pull, her rope work precise and sure, even as the wind tried to tear everything apart. When the rail was reset and secured, they stood there in the storm, breathing hard, grinning like fools. "We make a good team," Rhett shouted over the wind. "Don't let it go to your head," she shouted back, but he could see it in her eyes. She felt it too. This wasn't charity and gratitude anymore. This was partnership. This was something being built, board by board, choice by choice. The storm passed near midnight. Rhett was checking the last of the shutters when he heard her cry out, not pain, but something worse. Terror given voice. He found her sitting upright in bed, eyes open, but not seeing, chest heaving with panicked breaths. Night terrors. He'd seen them before in soldiers returned from bad campaigns. Every instinct screamed to go to her, to comfort, to fix. But he remembered her knife, her first words, her careful boundaries. So instead, he settled on the stoop just outside the door, close enough to hear, far enough to give her space. "I'm here," he said into the darkness. "You're safe. I'm not coming in, but I'm here." Her breathing gradually slowed. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time moved strange in the space between sleep and waking. Finally, her voice came soft through the doorway. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for. For not—" She trailed off, but he understood. "Yeah." In the morning, he found something on the porch rail. A small carved token smooth stone worked into the shape of a mountain. It fit perfect in his palm. "For standing where men run," Nalen said from the doorway. Rhett closed his fist around it, feeling its weight. "I'm not going anywhere." "I know." And the small smile that crossed her face, that was seismic. But as he pocketed the token and moved to start the day's work, something caught his eye, fresh hoofprints at the creek running parallel to the water, not shod like ranch horses, not random like wild ones. Painted riders, scouting. The riders from her past hadn't forgotten. The town hadn't either, if Voss was any indication. The peace they'd built here, fragile, precious, was about to be tested. Rhett looked at Nalen, seeing the same realization dawn in her eyes. Neither spoke the worry aloud, but as they moved to face the day, both knew the storm that had passed was nothing compared to what was coming. The choice had been made. Now came the consequences. And consequences Rhett Calder had learned rarely arrived alone. The hoofprints haunted Rhett through breakfast. He kept glancing toward the creek, measuring distances, calculating how long they'd been there. Fresh enough that the edges hadn't crumbled, old enough that whoever made them was long gone. Nalen noticed his distraction. You're thinking too loud. Just thinking. He poured coffee with hands steadier than he felt. Those tracks could be nothing. Could be. She didn't believe it any more than he did. Or it could be scouts, testing our awareness, seeing if we're worth the trouble. Are we? She looked at him over the rim of her cup, steam curling between them. I don't know yet. Are you? It wasn't a challenge exactly, more like a question they both needed answered. Rhett had made his choice in principle, but principle was easy when the threat stayed theoretical. When it showed up on your doorstep, that's when you learned what you were made of. Guess we'll find out, he said. The day's work called regardless of threats, real or imagined. Fences didn't mend themselves, and the water trough had developed a leak that needed addressing before they lost what little reserve they had. Rhett grabbed his tools while Nayland rolled toward the vegetable patch, such as it was, to salvage what the wind hadn't destroyed. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that comes when words would just clutter the air. Every so often Rhett would look up from his work to find Nayland doing the same, both checking on each other without making it obvious. It was a dance they'd learned without discussion, this mutual watching over that respected boundaries while acknowledging connection. Around midday, Nayland called out, "Someone's coming!" Rhett was on his feet in an instant, hand going to his pistol. But Nayland shook her head, pointing toward the main road rather than the creek trail. From town, wagon not horses. Sure enough, a supply wagon crested the rise, driven by young Tommy Brennan from the general store. The kid was barely 16, all elbows and optimism, and he pulled up to the ranch with the kind of caution that suggested he'd been warned about this errand. "Mr. Calder," Tommy's voice cracked halfway through the greeting. "Got a delivery for you." "Didn't order anything." "No, sir, but—" The kid glanced at Nayland, then away quickly, like he'd been told not to stare. "Mr. Kendrick said these are on account, said you might need them." Rhett approached the wagon and pulled back the tarp. Medical supplies, real ones, not the bare-bones basics he'd bought before. Bandages, antiseptic laudanum, even a bottle of carbolic acid for serious wounds. Enough to stock a field hospital. "This is too much." "Mr. Kendrick said—" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "He said things might get rough. Said you should be prepared." The implication hung heavy. Kendrick knew something or suspected something, and this was his way of helping without being seen to help. In a town like Dry Creek, that kind of discretion could mean the difference between support and a burned-out store. "Tell him I'm obliged," Rhett said quietly. "Yes, sir." Tommy started to turn the wagon, then hesitated. "Mr. Calder, for what it's worth, not everyone in town thinks like Deputy Voss. Some of us figure a man's business is his own." "Appreciate you saying so, Tommy." After the wagon disappeared down the road, Nayland wheeled over to inspect the supplies. Her fingers traced the labels, reading the medical terminology with unexpected familiarity. "Your grandmother teach you medicine too?" Rhett asked. "Among other things." She held up a packet of sutures. "She said knowledge is the only thing they can't take from you. Everything else, land, freedom, even your name, someone will try to steal it. But what you know, what you can do, that's yours forever." Wise woman, your grandmother. She was. Nayland's expression went distant. She spoke against my exile, said punishing survival was cowardice dressed as tradition. The elders accused her of being corrupted by my defiance. What happened to her? They took her voice. Nayland's jaw tightened. Not literally, but in the tribe, when the elders declare someone's words invalid, it's the same as silence. She could speak, but no one was allowed to acknowledge it. She died 6 months later. The healer said it was her heart, but I know better. It was the weight of being erased while still breathing. Rhett felt something fierce and protective rise into his chest. I'm sorry. Don't be. Be better. She met his eyes. That's what she would have wanted. Not sympathy action, living in a way that proves they were wrong about what women are worth. Before he could respond, a sound cut through the afternoon air, sharp, deliberate, unmistakable. 3 evenly spaced rifle shots from the ridgeline, not aimed at them, just fired into the air, a signal, a warning. Rhett's blood went cold. Inside, now. I know what you can do. Inside anyway, please. The please did it. Nolan rolled toward the house while Rhett grabbed his Winchester and moved to the porch, positioning himself where he could see the approach without being an easy target. The minutes crawled past like wounded things. When the riders appeared, there were 3 of them, Apache painted for something more formal than a raid. They rode in formation, unhurried, the lead rider carrying a staff decorated with feathers and beadwork. This wasn't an attack, it was a delegation. They stopped 50 yards out, and the lead rider called out in Apache. Rhett didn't speak the language, but Nolan did. She'd rolled to the window, and now she translated in a voice carefully stripped of emotion. He says I must return. The elders have reconsidered. They'll allow me back into the tribe if I accept my husband's brother as protector. Protector, Rhett spat. That's a hell of a word for what he tried to do. The lead rider spoke again, longer this time. Nolan's translation came slower, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. He says exile was meant to teach me humility, to show me that a woman alone cannot survive, that I would beg to return grateful for any man's protection. She paused, her knuckles white on the chair arms. He says the fact that I'm still alive proves I've found another protector, which means I understand now. I should come home and accept my place. What do you want to do? Rhett asked. What I want doesn't matter to them. It matters to me. The silence stretched between them and the waiting riders. Rhett could feel the weight of the moment, the pivot point where everything could change. This wasn't his choice to make, couldn't be, shouldn't be, but he needed her to know she had one. Nolan took a breath, then rolled herself out onto the porch. The riders tensed hands, moving toward weapons, but she stopped in the open back, straight eyes forward. When she spoke in Apache, her voice carried across the distance, clear and unbreakable. The lead rider's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something that might have been respect. His response was curt, almost angry. What did you say? Rhett asked quietly. I told them I will not go back, that I choose life here on my terms with my dignity intact. She glanced at him. I told them you are not my protector, you are my ally. There's a difference, and I've learned to know it. The lead rider barked something sharp. Nolan's response was just as sharp, and this time the rider's face darkened with genuine anger. He says if I refuse, the elders will come at dawn. They'll give me one final choice: return willingly or be declared permanently dead to the tribe, not just exiled, but erased. Every story, every memory gone. And you said, I said, some deaths are liberation. The riders wheeled their horses and departed at a gallop, dust rising in their wake like smoke from a funeral pyre. When they were gone, Nolan sagged slightly in her chair, the strength that had held her upright suddenly requiring too much effort. Tomorrow, then, she said quietly, at dawn. Then we prepare. Rhett set the Winchester aside and moved to stand beside her, not in front, not behind, but beside. Whatever you need, however you want to handle this. I need to think. She rolled toward the house, then paused. And Rhett, thank you for asking what I wanted. Most men just tell me what's best. Most men are fools. That earned him a small smile, brief as lightning, but just as bright. The afternoon was spent in preparation. Rhett checked weapons, counted ammunition, made sure the water barrels were full and the livestock secured. Nolan worked at her bench, her hands busy with something he couldn't quite see. Neither spoke much. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said with actions. As the sun started its descent, Nolan called him over. On her workbench lay a leather sheath, newly made, fitted for the knife he'd given her that first night. The leather was tooled with a pattern he recognized from her dress, Apache, but transformed into something new. For keeping safe, what keeps me safe, she said. Rhett picked it up, admiring the craftsmanship. When did you have time to make this? Time finds itself when hands need work more than minds need rest. She took it back and secured it to her chair's arm, the knife sliding home with a satisfying whisper. Tomorrow when they come, I want to be ready. Not to fight, I've done enough fighting, but to stand my ground without flinching. You've been doing that since you got here. No, I've been surviving. Tomorrow I start living. She met his eyes. There's a difference. Evening brought something unexpected, the sound of hoofbeats from the town road. Again multiple horses this time. Rhett grabbed his rifle, but Nayland touched his arm. Wait, listen. The riders were coming fast, but not in attack formation. There was something almost panicked in the rhythm. When they cleared the rise, Rhett's stomach dropped. Deputy Voss led the group, 5 riders in total, all armed. But they weren't dressed for a social call. This was a posse or something trying to look like one. Calder, Voss reined in hard, his horse foam-flecked from the ride. We got a problem. Only problem I see is you on my land without invitation. This ain't about invitation, this is about safety. Voss gestured toward Nayland without looking at her directly. Word is her people are coming at dawn. That means trouble for all of us. I'm here to take her into protective custody. Like hell you are, for her own safety and the town's. Voss's hand rested on his pistol, casual but obvious. You're harboring a fugitive, Calder. I got every right. You got no rights on my land. And she's not a fugitive, she's a guest. Rhett stepped forward, putting himself between Voss and the porch. You want her, you go through me. One of the other riders, a ranch hand named Sykes, spoke up. Rhett, be reasonable. If the Apache come looking for her and find her here, they might burn you out. Let Voss take her to town, lock her up safe until it blows over. Safe, Nayland said from the porch, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. You mean locked in a cell where anything could happen and no one would hear, where accidents occur and stories get told later? She laughed, bitter and knowing. I've heard that song before. I know how it ends. Now see here, Voss started. No, you see here. Rhett's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. Every man on this porch right now, look at me. Look at my face and tell me if you think I'm bluffing. They looked. Whatever they saw made most of them shift uncomfortably in their saddles. I'm telling you plain, she stays. Any man tries to take her leaves in a box or doesn't leave at all. That includes badge wearers, do-gooders, and anyone else who thinks they know better. He paused, letting it sink in. Now you got about 10 seconds to turn those horses around before I start enforcing property rights the old-fashioned way. Voss's face had gone purple with rage, but he wasn't stupid, not entirely. 6 against 1 was good odds, except the 1 was dug in with high ground and righteousness on his side, and the 6 were exposed on flatland with dubious legal standing. This ain't over, Calder. Never thought it was. The posse withdrew, but slowly making sure everyone understood this was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. When they were gone, Rhett turned to find Nayland watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You just made enemies of everyone, she said. Had enemies before. At least now I know who they are. Rhett. She rolled closer, her voice urgent. You understand what's happening. Tomorrow the elders come. Tonight the town came. You're caught between 2 fires and both of them want me gone. You could still don't. He knelt beside her chair, meeting her eyes level. Don't ask me to choose between what's easy and what's right. That's not a choice, and we both know it. I'm not worth this. That's not your call to make. He stood brushing dust from his knees. Besides, you already said it. Tomorrow you start living. Can't do that if you're locked up or dragged back to a tribe that erased you. So we hold the line, both fires be damned. Something shifted in her expression, gratitude, yes, but also recognition. The understanding that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the principle of the thing, the refusal to let cruelty win simply because it was traditional or convenient. Then we'd better prepare for a long night, she said finally. They worked as darkness fell, barring windows and checking sightlines. Rhett showed Nayland how to load the spare rifles, and she showed him Apache signs for warning and danger. It was an exchange of knowledge between equals, each bringing their strengths to bear on a shared problem. Around midnight, Nayland spoke from her position by the window. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For seeing me as a person before you saw me as a problem to solve." She was quiet for a moment. Most people, they see the scars or the chair or the exile, and they think they know the whole story. They want to help, but it's help that keeps you small, keeps you grateful, keeps you in debt. You never did that. Didn't seem right to. No, it didn't. She turned to look at him across the darkened room. "My grandmother used to say the measure of a person isn't how they treat those who can repay them, it's how they treat those who can't. You've asked nothing of me but honesty and effort. That's rare." Rhett didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence was the most honest response. The hours crawled past. They took turns at watch, one sleeping while the other kept vigil, though neither slept much. Every sound outside sent hands to weapons. Every shift in the wind brought a moment of tension. But the night remained quiet, as if the whole territory was holding its breath for dawn. At some point in the darkest hours, Rhett found himself thinking about his late wife, Sarah. She'd been gone 3 years, taken by pneumonia that came fast and killed faster. Before she died, she'd made him promise something. "Don't let the ranch make you hard," she'd whispered, her voice already fading. "Don't let loneliness convince you that walls keep you safe. They just keep you empty." At the time, he hadn't understood, but sitting here now, waiting for dawn and whatever it brought, he thought maybe he did. The walls he'd built after Sarah died, emotional ones, not physical, had kept him safe from hurt, but also from connection. Nayland's arrival hadn't torn those walls down so much as shown him they were never protection in the first place. Just prison walls he'd built himself. "You're thinking loud again," Nayland said from the darkness. "Just remembering. Your wife, yeah, she'd like you, I think." "Would she?" There was genuine curiosity in the question. "Why?" "Because you don't take any shit, and you make me remember there's more to life than work and waiting." He paused. "She always said the worst thing a person could do was survive without living. You've taught me the difference. I'm still learning it myself." Dawn came slow, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Rhett stood on the porch, Winchester cradled in his arms, watching the horizon for movement. Nayland was beside him in her chair, the knife he'd given her secured in its new sheath, her hands steady despite the circumstances. The elders arrived as promised, 3 of them on horseback, with Elder Gray Fox in the lead. He was ancient, his face a map of years, and whether his eyes sharp despite his age. Behind them came 2 women matriarchs, by their bearing their expressions unreadable. Gray Fox raised his hand in a gesture of peace, then spoke in Apache. Nayland translated, her voice steady. "He says they come to offer final choice. Return to the tribe and accept my place, or be declared dead. Once dead, I cease to exist in their stories, their history, their memory. I become nameless, faceless, erased." "And if you're erased," Rhett asked, "then any member of the tribe who encounters me may do as they wish, without consequence. I'm not a person anymore, I'm a ghost, and you can't murder a ghost." The cruelty of it stole his breath, but Gray Fox wasn't finished. He spoke again, longer this time, and Nayland's translation came with visible effort. He says this isn't punishment, it's mercy. A way for me to be released from the burden of existing outside tribal law. He says I should be grateful for the choice, because in the old days, there would be no choice, just consequence. "What do you want to do?" Rhett asked again, because the question still mattered, would always matter. Nayland took a breath, then rolled her chair forward until she was at the porch edge level with the mounted elders. When she spoke in Apache, her voice rang clear and certain across the morning air. Gray Fox's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. The matriarchs exchanged glances. Nalin kept speaking her words, building to something that felt like ceremony, like ritual, like a breaking of chains that had never been visible but had always been felt. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Gray Fox finally nodded, slow and deliberate. He spoke a single sentence, then turned his horse. The matriarchs remained a moment longer, and one of them, the older of the two, spoke directly to Nalin. Whatever she said made Nalin's breath catch. Then they were gone, riding back toward the ridge, at a walk unhurried and final. "What did you say?" Rhett asked when they'd disappeared. "I chose exile. Permanent, complete, irreversible." Nalin's voice trembled, but not with fear. With something else, liberation maybe, or the first breath after nearly drowning. "I told them I'd rather be erased from their story than written as a victim in it. That I choose life here on my terms, with my name, my own." And Gray Fox, he said, "The choice is witnessed and binding, that the tribe will never hunt me, never claim me, never speak my name. I'm free." She laughed, shaky and disbelieving. "I'm actually free." What did the matriarch say? Nalin's eyes filled, but she smiled through it. She said, "Your grandmother would be proud." Then she said, "Live well, nameless one. Live so well they regret erasing you." Rhett felt something in his chest crack open, not breaking, but opening like a door long locked, finally swinging wide. He wanted to say something profound, something equal to the moment, but all that came out was, "You did it. We did it." She reached out and he took her hand. "I couldn't have stood alone, not yet, maybe not ever." "You won't have to." They stood there on the porch, hands joined, watching the sun climb higher. One fire extinguished, but even as relief washed through him, Rhett knew. The other fire, the one from town, was still burning. And unlike the tribal elders, Deputy Voss didn't believe in mercy or choice. He believed in control, and men like that didn't give up just because they'd lost the first round. The peace they'd won this morning was real, but it was also fragile. And fragile things, Rhett knew, required constant vigilance to keep whole. The peace lasted exactly 4 hours. Rhett was mending harness leather in the barn when he heard it, the sound of multiple horses approaching fast from the town road. Not the measured pace of the tribal elders, but the aggressive thunder of men who'd worked themselves into righteousness on the ride over. He dropped the leather and grabbed his rifle, already moving toward the house. Nalin was at her workbench, but she'd heard it too. Her hand went to the knife at her chair's arm. "How many?" she asked, voice calm despite the tension in her shoulders. 6, maybe 7. Rhett positioned himself at the window, counting riders as they crested the rise. "Voss is leading them, and damn it, he's got the mayor with him." Mayor Hargrove was a politician through and through. Soft hands, softer spine, the kind of man who'd blow whichever direction the wind seemed strongest. His presence here meant Voss had convinced enough of the town that this was official business, not personal vendetta. They reined up 20 yards from the house, close enough to talk, but far enough to retreat if needed. Voss sat his horse like he owned it and everything else in sight. Hargrove looked distinctly uncomfortable, his collar already dark with sweat despite the morning cool. "Calder," Voss called out. "We need to talk, peaceable-like. We talked last night, my position hasn't changed." "Maybe not, but circumstances have." Hargrove urged his horse forward a few steps, his voice taking on that rehearsed quality of prepared speeches. "The town council met this morning. We've got concerns, Rhett, real concerns about safety and—" "Safety," Nalin said from inside, her voice carrying through the open door. "Funny how that word always means someone else's comfort at my expense." Hargrove flinched at being interrupted, but pressed on. "The Apache situation is resolved, we hear. The elders made their choice, you made yours. Fine, that's done, but now we got to think about the town's reputation, about what people are saying." "Let them say it," Rhett cut in. "I'm not changing my mind because some folks are uncomfortable with their own prejudices." Voss's horse sidestepped, sensing its rider's agitation. "This ain't about prejudice, it's about decency. A man and a woman unmarried living under one roof, it ain't proper. Sets a bad example. For who? Rhett's finger found the Winchester's trigger guard, not threatening, just ready. Seems to me the only people bothered are the ones looking for reasons to be bothered. Look, Rhett. Hargrove tried a different tack, his voice going conciliatory. We're not asking you to send her away, just make it proper. Marry her if you want her here. Make it legal. Make it right in the eyes of God and the law. The silence that followed was profound. Rhett felt Nayland's eyes on him, felt the weight of expectations neither of them had asked for. The suggestion was absurd on its face. They'd known each other barely a week, and marriage as a solution to town gossip was insulting to the institution and to them both. But it was also revealing. The town would accept Nayland's presence if it came with ownership papers, if Rhett claimed her as property the way a husband claimed a wife. That was the trade they were offering, respectability in exchange for possession. No, Rhett said simply. No. Voss's voice climbed an octave. What do you mean, no? I mean, no, we're not getting married to satisfy your sensibilities. This woman is a guest in my home, nothing more, nothing less. If that bothers you, the solution's simple: stop thinking about it. One of the other riders, a shopkeeper named Dalton, spoke up. Rhett, be reasonable. You're asking this town to accept a situation that goes against everything we believe about proper conduct. Give us something to work with here. I'm not asking the town to accept anything. I'm living my life on my land, and what happens here is my business. Rhett stepped out onto the porch now, Winchester held casual but present. You want to talk about conduct? Let's talk about a posse showing up to harass a man on his own property. Let's talk about threatening a woman who's already survived more than most of you have faced in your soft lives. We're not threatening anyone, Hargrove protested weakly. Then what do you call this, a social visit? Nayland had rolled to the door, now her presence shifting the dynamic immediately. You ride here in numbers, armed, making demands. Where I come from, that's called a war party. But I suppose when white men do it, it's called civic duty. The observation landed like a slap. Several of the riders had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Voss just sneered. Listen to her, Calder, getting mighty uppity for someone who should be grateful she's got a roof over her head at all. That's enough. Rhett's voice went quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded storms. You've said your piece, we've said ours. Now you can leave, or I can make you leave. Your choice, but choose quick. The council's not done with this, Hargrove warned, trying to salvage some authority from the situation. There'll be consequences. There always are, Nayland said. But consequences go both ways. You want to make this a fight, we'll fight. But don't expect us to lose quietly, just because you've got numbers and badges and the comfort of thinking you're right. For a long moment, the standoff held. Then Hargrove, reading the situation better than Voss, tugged his horse's reins and turned. Come on, we've made our position clear. It's up to them now. Voss lingered, his hand resting on his pistol in a gesture that was all threat and no substance. This ain't over, Calder. Not by a long shot. It is for today, Rhett replied evenly. Now get off my land before I forget I'm trying to be civilized about this. The posse withdrew, but unlike the tribal elders, they didn't ride with finality. They rode with the promise of return, of escalation, of a town's will being enforced one way or another. When they were out of sight, Rhett lowered the rifle and let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Nayland rolled up beside him, and they stood together in the morning sun, both processing what had just happened. They'll be back, she said. I know. With more people next time, maybe the law, maybe a mob. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. I know that too. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Why didn't you just agree? Tell them we'd get married, make them happy, make them go away. Because it would have been a lie, and because... He paused, searching for words that felt true. Because if we did that, it wouldn't be our choice anymore. It'd be theirs. And I've seen what happens when people stop making their own choices. They stop being people and start being what others need them to be. So we stand our ground. We stand our ground, he confirmed, unless you want something different. This is your life too, Nalin, your choice to make. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the chair's arm. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. You know what's strange? My whole life men have told me what to do. Told me who to marry, how to behave, what to want. Even the good ones like my father. They told me with love, but they still told me, you're the first man who keeps asking what I want instead of deciding for me. Seems like the bare minimum of decency. Maybe, but the bare minimum is still more than most offer. She turned her chair to face him fully. I want to stay, not because I need protection or because I'm grateful or because I don't have anywhere else to go. I want to stay because here on this rundown ranch with its broken fences and squeaky windmill, I feel like a person again, like I matter as something more than a problem to solve or a lesson to teach. Rhett felt something warm and dangerous bloom in his chest. Not love, not yet, maybe never, but something equally powerful. Respect, partnership, the recognition of kindred spirits finding each other in a world that insisted they shouldn't. Then you stay, he said simply, and damn what anyone else thinks about it. They went back to work because work didn't care about town councils or moral outrage. The ranch needed tending, and sitting around worrying wouldn't mend fences or feed livestock. But there was a new awareness between them now, a heightened sense of being a team against the world. Around midday, Rhett was replacing rotted boards on the barn wall when he heard Nalin call out. Not alarm exactly, but something that made him grab his rifle anyway. We've got a visitor, she said, pointing toward the creek trail. A single rider approached, moving slow and careful with hands clearly visible on the reins. As they got closer, Rhett recognized the worn hat and patched jacket Tommy Brennan from the general store, the kid who'd delivered the medical supplies. Tommy stopped a respectful distance from the house and called out, Mr. Calder, miss, I come with a message. No trouble, I swear. Come ahead, Tommy. Slow. The kid rode closer, dismounting when Rhett indicated it was safe. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between them like he wasn't sure who to address. Mr. Kendrick sent me, said I should tell you. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. The council's meeting again tomorrow night. They're putting it to a vote whether to issue an order of removal against Miss Nalin. Removal. Nalin's voice was sharp. On what grounds? Vagrancy, they're calling it. And public indecency. Tommy's face flushed. I don't believe it, ma'am, none of it. But Deputy Voss, he's got half the council convinced that your presence here is a threat to public morals. If they vote yes, he'll have legal authority to remove you by force. Rhett felt cold fury settle in his gut. How's Kendrick voting? Against it, sir. Him and a couple others. But it's going to be close. Tommy shifted his weight. He also said, and this is just him talking, not me, he said you might want to consider making yourself scarce for a while. Let things cool down. Run, he means, Nalin said flatly. Hide and hope they forget. I'm just delivering the message, ma'am. And we appreciate it, Tommy. Rhett pulled a coin from his pocket and tossed it to the kid. You tell Kendrick we're not running, but we're obliged for the warning. After Tommy left, Rhett and Nalin sat on the porch, both processing this new development. An order of removal carried legal weight even if the grounds were flimsy. It meant Voss could act with impunity, could use force, without consequence could drag Nalin off to jail or worse, and claim he was just doing his duty. They're not going to stop, Nalin said quietly. Not the town, not Voss. They've decided I'm wrong somehow, and they won't rest until that wrong is corrected. Then we make it too costly to correct. Rhett was thinking out loud now, working through options. We need allies, people in town who'll speak up, who'll vote against this madness. You think there are enough of them? I don't know, but sitting here won't answer that question. The decision made, they spent the afternoon preparing. Rhett cleaned and loaded every weapon on the property, while Nayland went through the medical supplies, organizing them for quick access. Neither spoke much. The work said everything that needed saying. As evening approached, Rhett made a decision. I'm going into town tomorrow, before the vote. I need to talk to people, make them see reason. That's dangerous. Voss will be watching for you. Probably. But doing nothing is more dangerous. He looked at her. You'll be alone here for a few hours. You good with that? I've been alone before. I survived. I know, but this is different. If someone comes, I'll handle it. She patted the rifle propped against her chair. I'm not helpless, Rhett. I'm just careful about who I trust with my safety. The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. Rhett saddled his horse as the sun painted the horizon gold and red. Warning colors, his mother used to say. Red sky, at morning sailor, take warning. Be careful, Nayland said from the porch. Always am. Be more careful than always. He swung into the saddle, then paused. There was something he needed to say, something that felt important even if he couldn't quite name why. Nayland, whatever happens today, whatever the council decides, whatever comes next, I want you to know, I don't regret any of this. Finding you, bringing you here, standing with you, none of it. She smiled, small but genuine. Neither do I. Now go, be persuasive, be smart. And if neither works, be dangerous. The ride to Dry Creek took an hour, and Rhett used every minute to plan his approach. He needed to reach the reasonable people before Voss poisoned them completely. Needed to make them see that fear and prejudice, dressed as morality, were still just fear and prejudice. The town was busier than usual for a weekday morning. Word of the vote had spread, and people were choosing sides, gathering in clusters to debate and argue and reinforce their existing beliefs. Rhett noticed immediately how the conversation stopped. When he rode past, how people turned to watch him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. He tied his horse outside Kendrick's store and went in. The shopkeeper was behind the counter, his face drawn with worry. Rhett, wasn't sure you'd come. Couldn't not come. Rhett leaned on the counter, keeping his voice low. How's it looking? Bad. Voss has been making the rounds since dawn, stirring people up. He's got them thinking you and that woman are living in sin, corrupting the youth, inviting Apache raids, every fear he can conjure. Kendrick wiped his hands on his apron, a nervous gesture. I've got maybe 3 votes against the removal, including mine. You need at least 7 to block it. Then I need to find 4 more. Or you need to give them what they want. Rhett's jaw tightened. Not happening. Rhett, listen to me. This town, it runs on appearances, on respectability. If you just married the woman, this all goes away. They could accept her as your wife where they can't accept her as your whatever she is. She's a person, that's what she is, and I'm not trading her dignity for their comfort. Kendrick sighed. Then you better be ready for what's coming, because Voss, he's not just pushing for removal anymore. He's talking about burning you out if the vote fails. Says a man who harbors fugitives and lives in sin has forfeited his right to property. The words hit like a physical blow. He said that in public to anyone who'll listen, and Rhett, some folks are listening real hard. Rhett straightened, his mind racing. This wasn't just about a council vote anymore. This was about mob justice, about giving righteous cover to violence and theft. If he didn't stop this here tonight, there might not be a ranch to go back to. I need to talk to the council members directly, before the vote. Most of them won't see you. Voss has them spooked. Then I'll make them see me. He left the store and started making rounds. The blacksmith turned him away at the door. The doctor refused to answer his knock. At the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson saw him coming and literally locked the door, her face visible through the window glass, apologetic but unyielding. By noon, Rhett had spoken to exactly 2 council members, and both were already voting against the removal. He wasn't gaining ground, he was confirming what Kendrick had told him. The town had made up its mind. He was heading back to his horse when a voice stopped him. Mr. Calder. He turned to find a young woman, maybe 20, standing in the alley beside the church. She wore a simple dress and had the look of someone who'd scrubbed floors for a living, rough hands, tired eyes, but something fierce in her expression. "I'm Mary Sykes. My husband rides with Deputy Voss sometimes." Rhett's hand moved closer to his pistol, subtle but ready. "That's so? Don't worry, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because—" She glanced around, making sure they were alone. "Because I heard what they're planning. The vote, the removal, all of it, and I think it's wrong. You're in the minority. Maybe, but I wanted you to know there's some of us who see what's really happening. Voss and his men, they don't care about morality. They care about power, about putting people in their place." Her voice dropped. "My husband, he comes home sometimes and talks about what they plan to do. If the vote passes, they're not just removing her. They're planning to make an example, something that'll scare off any other woman who gets ideas about living independent." Rhett felt sick. "What kind of example? The kind that involves a whip and a public square?" She met his eyes. "I can't vote, I'm a woman, but I can tell you what's coming, and I can tell you that if you don't stop this vote tomorrow night, won't be about legal removal. It'll be about punishment." "Why are you telling me this?" Mary's laugh was bitter. "Because 10 years ago I had ideas too, about living my own way, making my own choices. Then I married my husband because everyone said a woman needed a man, needed protection. Now I scrub his floors and bite my tongue when he drinks, and I wonder what my life would have been if someone had shown me there was another way." She straightened her shoulders. "That Apache woman, she's living the life I was too scared to choose. Someone should protect that, even if it's not me." She left before Rhett could respond, disappearing into the afternoon crowds like she'd never been there, but her words stayed with him, heavy and urgent. He found Kendrick again as the shopkeeper was closing up for lunch. "I need a favor, a big one. Name it. I need you to get word to anyone in town who might listen. Anyone who's got doubts about this vote, anyone who's been bullied by Voss, anyone who thinks maybe this has gone too far. Tell them to come to the council meeting tonight. Tell them to speak up. Rhett, they're scared. Voss has them thinking that crossing him means crossing the whole town's moral authority. Then they need to see someone cross him and survive. They need to see that standing up is possible." Rhett gripped Kendrick's shoulder. "I'm not asking them to fight, just to witness, to be there. Sometimes that's enough." Kendrick nodded slowly. "I'll try, but don't expect miracles. Don't need miracles, just need enough decent people to remember they're decent." The council meeting was set for 7 that evening. Rhett spent the intervening hours at the saloon, not drinking, just watching, listening to the talk. The sentiment was clear. Most folks thought he should just marry Nayland and be done with it, make everything proper and acceptable. Those who didn't think that believed he should send her away entirely, cut his losses before the situation got worse. Almost no one thought she had a right to be there on her own terms. As evening approached, Rhett made his way to the town hall, a squat building that doubled as a church on Sundays, and a meeting space the rest of the week. People were already gathering more than usual for a council vote. Word had spread that this would be worth watching. Voss was there, of course, standing near the front with his arms crossed, and a smile that promised trouble. The council members filed in, taking their seats behind a long table. Mayor Hargrove banged a gavel, calling for order. "We're here to vote on Order 47, the removal of one Nayland, no surname, from the property of Rhett Calder on grounds of vagrancy and public indecency." Hargrove's voice had the dull quality of someone reciting memorized words. "But first, we'll hear testimony. Deputy Voss." Voss stepped forward, launching into a speech he'd clearly prepared. He talked about moral standards and protecting the innocent, about the sanctity of marriage and the dangers of allowing savage influences into civilized society. He painted Nayland as a threat and Rhett as a man who'd lost his way, corrupted by misplaced sympathy. It was a masterful performance, all righteous indignation and concern for the common good. By the time he finished, half the room was nodding along. "Mr. Calder," Hargrove offered to him. You want to speak? Rhett stood very aware of every eye on him. This was it, his chance to change minds or confirm their worst assumptions. I'm not good with speeches, he began. Never have been. So I'll just say it plain. The woman living at my ranch, she's there because I found her dying and offered help. She's there because when given the choice between running or standing her ground, she chose to stand. She's there because she's a human being who deserves the same dignity and choice we all claim to want. Dignity and choice, someone called from the crowd. What about decency? What about God's law? God's law says we should help the widow and the orphan, the stranger and the exile. Pretty sure it doesn't say we should only help them if they make us comfortable. Rhett's voice was steady calm. As for decency, I'm not sure what's decent about trying to remove a woman by force just because her presence reminds you that maybe your rules aren't as universal as you thought. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hargrove banged the gavel. Order, order. The point is, Rhett continued, Nolan isn't hurting anyone. She's not breaking any real laws. She's just existing in a way that challenges your expectations and that scares you, but fear's a poor reason to destroy someone's life. Fear. Voss stepped forward again. We're not afraid, Calder. We're protecting our way of life. If we let one woman live outside the rules, where does it end? Next thing you know, every woman in town will think she can just do as she pleases with no husband, no oversight. And that's a problem because the voice came from the back of the room. Mary Sykes stood, her face pale but her voice strong. Maybe some of us wouldn't mind doing as we please. The room erupted. Voss's face went purple. Hargrove banged the gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but something had shifted, a crack in the certainty, a moment of doubt. Mrs. Sykes, this isn't the time, Hargrove started. It's exactly the time. Mary stepped forward and Rhett saw her hands shaking but her spine straight. We're about to vote on whether a woman has the right to live where she chooses, with whom she chooses, on what terms she chooses. That affects every woman here, whether you admit it or not. Women's rights. Someone laughed derisive. Next, you'll want the vote. Maybe we should have it, Mary shot back, seeing as we've got more sense than to let fear and spite drive our decisions. The chaos this caused bought Rhett precious seconds. He looked around the room, seeing faces he knew, farmers, shopkeepers, laborers, good people mostly who'd just gotten caught up in Voss's narrative, who'd been told that discomfort was danger, that difference was disease. Listen, Rhett raised his voice over the din, all of you, look at what this has become. We're about to use government power to punish a woman for the crime of existing wrong. Does that sound like justice to anyone? Does that sound like the community you want to be part of? Silence fell heavy and waiting. Hargrove cleared his throat. We'll move to a vote. All in favor of Order 47, the removal of Nolan from Mr. Calder's property. 4 hands went up, then a 5th, then a 6th. Rhett's heart sank. 7 was the majority. They'd done it. But then Councilman Reed, who'd had his hand up, slowly lowered it. Actually, no. I vote no. Reed, what are you? Voss started. I said no. This whole thing, it doesn't sit right. Calder's right. We're punishing someone for making us uncomfortable, and that ain't justice. Reed looked at Rhett. I don't like the situation, don't approve of it, but I'm not using the law to enforce my approval. 2 other hands came down. The vote was tied. Hargrove looked genuinely surprised. Well, in the event of a tie, the motion fails. Order 47 is rejected. The room exploded into argument, recrimination, and relief in equal measure. Voss was shouting about revotes and procedural violations. Mary Sykes caught Rhett's eye and nodded once, then slipped out the side door before her husband could see her. But Rhett knew this wasn't over. Voss's face was a mask of rage barely contained. A man like that didn't accept defeat. He just changed tactics. Rhett made his way through the crowd and out into the night. He needed to get back to the ranch, needed to tell Nolan they'd won the vote, even if they hadn't won the war. He was untying his horse when Kendrick appeared beside him. You did it. I didn't think you could, but you did. We did. You, Mary Sykes Reed, everyone who found their courage. Rhett swung into the saddle. But Kendrick, watch yourself. Voss isn't going to forget this. I know, but sometimes standing up is worth the cost. Rhett rode hard for home, pushing the horse faster than was smart in the dark. He had a bad feeling, the kind that lived in your gut and told you something was wrong even before your brain caught up. When he crested the final rise and saw the ranch, his worst fears seemed unrealized. No smoke, no fire, no obvious damage. But something was off. The lights were wrong, too many of them in places they shouldn't be. Then he saw them riders circling the property, torches in hand, at least a dozen, maybe more. And at their head, unmistakable even in shadow, was Deputy Voss. They'd come while he was in town, come to do what the law wouldn't let them. Rhett kicked his horse into a full gallop rifle, already in hand. The distance closed with agonizing slowness. He could see Nalin on the porch now, her chair positioned in the doorway, rifle across her lap. The riders had stopped circling and formed a line facing the house. Voss's voice carried across the night air, saying something Rhett couldn't make out. Nalin's response was shorter, sharper. Then, as Rhett watched in horror, Voss drew his pistol. The gunshot cracked across the desert, and Rhett's world narrowed to a single point of terror. The gunshot didn't hit Nalin. It hit the porch post 6 inches from her head, sending splinters flying. A warning shot meant to intimidate. But Rhett saw her flinch, saw her raise her own rifle in response, and his fear turned to cold fury. He was still 200 yards out when he fired his own warning shot into the air, the crack loud enough to make every head turn. The riders wheeled their horses' torches, swinging wild, creating chaos in their formation. That's far enough, Rhett's voice carried across the distance as he closed in fast. Next man points a weapon at her, gets more than a warning. Voss's horse pranced sideways, but the deputy held his ground. Calder, you weren't invited to this conversation. Rhett reined in hard, 20 feet from the line of riders, his Winchester now leveled at Voss's chest. That what we're calling armed intimidation now? We're here on official business. The council vote was corrupted, threats were made, witnesses intimidated. Voss's voice was loud, performative, meant for his men more than Rhett. We're exercising our right as citizens to correct an injustice. By surrounding my home with guns and torches, that's not justice, that's a lynch mob with extra steps. One of the riders, a ranch hand named Cooper, spoke up. We don't want trouble, Rhett, just want things set right. You heard what people are saying, this situation ain't proper. Give us the woman, let us take her to the county seat for proper processing, and we'll leave peaceful. Proper processing, Nalin called from the porch, her voice steady despite the rifle trembling slightly in her hands. I've heard that before. It usually ends with a whip and a shallow grave. Nobody's talking about hurting you, squaw, Voss started. Finish that sentence and I drop you where you sit. Rhett interrupted, his finger finding the trigger. I've had about enough of your mouth tonight. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Horses shifted nervously, sensing their riders' fear and aggression. Torchlight painted everything in harsh orange and deep shadow, making it hard to read faces, harder to predict movement. You can't hold off all of us, Voss said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Even if you drop me, my men will. Your men will what? Burn down this ranch, shoot an unarmed woman. Rhett's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. Go ahead. See how well Dry Creek sleeps, knowing it sanctioned murder over gossip. See how quick the territorial marshal comes asking questions when a decorated deputy dies in an act of mob violence. That hit home. Several riders exchanged glances. They'd signed up for intimidation, maybe some rough handling if needed. But cold-blooded killing was something else entirely, and Rhett could see the doubt spreading through the group like cracks in ice. This is your last chance, Calder. Voss pressed on, desperate now. Send her out, or we come in and take her. Then you better come fast and shoot straight, because the first man through that gate catches lead." The standoff stretched seconds, feeling like hours. Rhett could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the Winchester, could sense Nolan behind him calculating odds and escape routes, everything balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for someone to make the wrong move. It was Cooper who broke first. "Voss, this is crazy. We're about to start a shooting war over one woman. My wife's gonna ask me why I came home with holes in me. What do I tell her? That I got shot defending the town's moral standards? You tell her you did your duty. My duty's to feed my family, not die for your pride." Cooper turned his horse. "I'm out. Anyone with sense should be too." Two more riders peeled off, then three. Within seconds, half of Voss's mob had decided that conviction wasn't worth dying for. The deputy's face went from red to purple to something approaching ash white as he watched his support crumble. "You cowards, you're letting them make fools of us." "No," one of the departing riders called back. "We're just choosing to be alive fools instead of dead heroes for a cause that don't make sense when you look at it square." Voss was left with 4 men, and even they looked uncertain. The deputy's hand still rested on his pistol, his whole body radiating frustrated rage. For a moment, Rhett thought he might actually draw, might force this to a conclusion written in gunpowder and blood. But then a new voice cut through the night. "Deputy Voss, I do believe your authority here has expired." Everyone turned. Mayor Hargrove sat on a horse at the edge of the property, and beside him was Marshal Owen Blackwood from the Territorial Office, a man with a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for vigilante justice. Voss's face went through several expressions before settling on forced innocence. "Marshal Blackwood, we were just what, conducting an illegal raid on private property, threatening violence against a citizen." Blackwood urged his horse forward, his weathered face impassive. "I got a telegram tonight from Councilman Reed. He had concerns about your interpretation of tonight's vote. The vote was compromised. The vote was legal and binding, and you damn well know it." Blackwood's voice never rose, but it carried absolute authority. "Now you and your remaining friends can either disperse peaceful-like, or I can arrest the lot of you for attempted assault and conspiracy to commit arson. Your choice, but choose quick, because my patience is thinner than my coffee." The remaining riders needed no further encouragement. They turned and rode off, leaving Voss alone in the torchlight. His moment of triumph turned to ash. "This isn't over," Voss said, but the fire had gone out of him. "Yes, it is," Blackwood replied. "As of now, you're suspended from duty pending investigation. Badge and gun, please." "You can't." "I can, and I am. Hand them over or I'll take them." Voss's hands shook as he removed his badge and pistol, passing them to Blackwood with a look of pure hatred. Then he rode off into the darkness, a man diminished by his own overreach. Blackwood watched him go, then turned to Rhett. "Mr. Calder, Miss Nayland, seems you've had an eventful evening." "That's one word for it." Rhett lowered his rifle, finally allowing himself to breathe. "Marshal, I appreciate the timing. Thank Councilman Reed and the shopkeeper Kendrick. They rode out to find me soon as the vote happened, said they suspected Voss might try something stupid." Blackwood dismounted, approaching the porch with his hands visible and non-threatening. "Ma'am, you hurt." Nolan shook her head, her rifle finally lowering. "Just tired of being everyone's problem." "Well, far as I'm concerned, you're not a problem at all. You're a citizen on private property, which means you got rights like anyone else." He looked between them. "I'll be staying at the hotel in Dry Creek for a few days. Make sure this situation stays settled. Anyone gives you trouble, you send word." "Obliged, Marshal," Rhett said. After Blackwood and the mayor left, Rhett turned to find Nayland slumped in her chair, the strength that had held her upright finally giving out. He was beside her in 2 strides. "You okay?" "I'm alive. That's about all I can claim right now." She looked up at him, and he saw tears tracking down her face, not from fear or pain, but from sheer exhaustion. How many more times, Rhett? How many more times do we have to fight just to exist? He had no answer for that, so instead he knelt beside her chair and did something he hadn't done since Sarah died. He let someone see him break. His hands shook as he gripped the chair's arm, his breathing uneven as the weight of the night crashed down on him. I saw him shoot, Rhett said, his voice rough. Saw that gun go up, and I thought I'd lost you before I even understood what you meant to me. What I mean to you, her hand found his squeezing gently. Rhett, you're not just anything. He stopped searching for words that wouldn't sound crazy or presumptuous. You're the first person in 3 years who's made me feel like life might be worth more than work and waiting. You're stubborn and brave, and you call out my bullshit. And somewhere in the past week, I started thinking of this place as ours instead of mine. Nalin was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. In my language, there's a word, ahehi. It means thank you, but deeper. It means I see what you've given, and I honor it. That's what I feel for you. Not gratitude like debt, gratitude like recognition, like seeing and being seen. Ahehi, Rhett repeated, mangling the pronunciation, but trying. She smiled through her tears. Close enough. They sat like that for a while. Hands joined the night quiet around them, except for the wind and the distant yip of coyotes. The torches the riders had dropped still flickered in the dirt, with their light slowly dying. Finally, Rhett stood. We should get inside. Long day tomorrow. Longer than most, Nalin asked, a hint of her usual sharpness returning. Definitely longer than most. The next morning arrived with rain, real rain, the first in months. It started as a drizzle that turned the dust to mud, then built to a steady downpour that drummed on the roof and washed the scorch marks from the porch where Voss's warning shot had splintered wood. Rhett stood at the window watching water pour off the eaves like a curtain. Behind him, Nalin was at her workbench, hands busy with leather and thread. Neither had slept much, but there was work to do regardless. Feels like a baptism, Nalin said without looking up. Washing away what was. Or making mud to build with, hard to say which. She smiled at that. Always the optimist. Someone's got to be. The rain brought an unexpected visitor around midday, Marshall Blackwood riding a horse that looked as miserable as wet horses always do. Rhett met him at the door with coffee already poured. Marshall, bit nasty out there for riding. Had to make the rounds anyway. Thought I'd stop by, make sure last night stayed settled. Blackwood accepted the coffee gratefully, steam rising from the cup. Voss left town this morning, caught the stage east, said he had family in Kansas. He mentioned coming back, not in so many words, but I made it clear that if he did, he'd be answering questions about last night's activities in front of a judge. Blackwood took a sip. Also took the liberty of talking to some folks in town, made sure they understood that harassing you two would be viewed as harassment of witnesses in an ongoing investigation. Is there an ongoing investigation? Nalin asked. There is now. Official inquiry into Deputy Voss's conduct and the circumstances leading to his suspension. Blackwood's eyes crinkled with something that might have been humor. Funny how having an official investigation makes people real reluctant to cause trouble. We appreciate it, Marshall, Rhett said, but we both know investigations end. What happens then? Then you keep living your lives, and if anyone's got a problem with it, they can take it up with the territorial court instead of a mob. Blackwood set down his cup. Look, I'm not going to pretend this is over. Towns like Dry Creek, they've got long memories and strong opinions. You'll probably catch grief for years, but it'll be the quiet kind, not the burning, your house down kind. I can live with quiet grief, Nalin said. After Blackwood left, they returned to work. The rain had revealed new leaks in the barn roof, and the corral fence had sagged further under the weight of wet earth. It was the kind of work that never ended the steady battle against entropy that defined ranch life. But as they worked Rhett up on the roof with tar and shingles, Nayland below organizing tools and calling up instructions, something felt different. Lighter, maybe, like a weight they hadn't known they were carrying had finally lifted. "Hand me that hammer," Rhett called down. "Which one, the big one or the small one? The one that works." That narrows it down to exactly none of them. He laughed, genuine and full, and the sound surprised him. When was the last time he'd laughed like that? Before Sarah died, certainly. Maybe even before that. The rain continued through the afternoon, steady and soaking. By evening, the ranch looked transformed, colors deeper, edges softer, the whole place washed clean in a way that felt almost symbolic. They ate dinner on the porch, despite the wet, both drawn to the sight of water falling on parched earth. The meal was simple beans and cornbread, but it tasted like celebration. "You know what the elders used to say about rain?" Nayland asked, watching the drops create patterns in the puddles. "What's that? That it's the earth's way of crying and cleansing at the same time, that grief and renewal are the same water just falling at different times." Rhett considered that. Seems about right. Everything worth having comes with a cost. The trick is deciding which costs are worth paying. And this, she gestured at the ranch, at themselves, at the fragile piece they'd built. Was it worth it? Every moment, every fight, every night I spent wondering if we'd see morning. He met her eyes. Yeah, it was worth it. The rain finally stopped near midnight, leaving the world smelling of wet earth and possibility. Rhett did a final check of the property, while Nayland prepared for bed. Everything was secure, quiet, almost peaceful. He was about to head inside when he heard the sound of a horse approaching from the creek trail. His hand went to his pistol body, tensing for another fight. But the rider who appeared in the moonlight wasn't Voss or any of his men. It was Elder Gray Fox. The old man sat his horse with the same dignity as before, but something was different in his bearing, less formal, more personal. He raised a hand in greeting, and Rhett cautiously returned the gesture. "Mr. Calder," Gray Fox said in careful English. "I come alone, to speak." "About what?" "About the one who chose exile." He glanced toward the house. "Is she well?" "Well enough." "Why?" Gray Fox was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with care. "In our tribe, there is a belief that when someone is erased, their spirit becomes free to walk where it wishes, no longer bound by our laws, no longer limited by our expectations." He paused. "The matriarch who spoke to her at the exile, she was her grandmother's sister. She asked me to deliver a message if I found the chance." Rhett's hand moved away from his pistol. What message? That her grandmother's last words were these: "The one who refuses the chain will teach others to see chains. This is not curse, this is purpose." Gray Fox's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Her grandmother knew the elders would exile her. She prepared for it, to taught her granddaughter everything she would need to survive alone. It was not abandonment, it was training. The implications settled slowly. Her grandmother planned this, not planned, prepared for. There is difference. Gray Fox straightened in his saddle. "I cannot speak for the tribe. I cannot reverse the exile. But I can say this: what she has chosen, what you both have chosen, it is seen. Some see it with anger, yes, but others see it with wonder, with possibility. I don't understand. You don't need to. Just know that the erasure, it is not complete. Some of us remember, some of us watch, and some of us hope that what you build here becomes the story our children tell, the one about the woman who chose dignity over belonging, and the man who chose partnership over power." Before Rhett could respond, Gray Fox turned his horse. "Tell her the matriarch's message. Tell her that being erased from one story means being free to write another. And tell her," he paused, looking back, "tell her that her grandmother would be proud." Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, like he'd never been there at all. Rhett stood in the moonlight processing what he'd just heard. The grandmother had prepared Nayland for exile, had given her the tools to survive it. which meant the whole terrible journey from whipping to exile to Rhett's ranch had been anticipated, maybe even engineered. Not cruel, strategic. A grandmother's fierce love taking the form of brutal preparation. He went inside and found Naylin still awake, sitting at her workbench with a piece of leather in her hands, but her attention somewhere else. "We had a visitor," Rhett said. "I know, I heard the horse." She looked up. "Gray fox." "Yeah, he had a message from your grandmother's sister." Rhett repeated the words as exactly as he could, watching Nalin's face shift through surprise, understanding, and finally something like awe. "She knew," Nalin whispered. She knew they'd exile me, and she prepared me for it. All those lessons about survival, about medicine, about defending myself. She wasn't just teaching me to be strong. She was teaching me to be free." "Seems like it." Nalin's hands trembled on the leather. "I thought she'd failed to protect me, thought she'd let the elders win when she died, but she didn't fail. She just fought on different terms, gave me weapons they couldn't see or confiscate." "She gave you yourself," Rhett said quietly. "Sounds like the best weapon there is." They sat together in the lamplight, both thinking about the invisible chains that bound people and the rare souls who learned to see them clearly enough to break free. Outside, the last drops of rain fell from the eaves, each one catching moonlight before joining the earth. The next morning brought unexpected news in the form of young Tommy Brennan riding out with a bundle of letters and a nervous expression. "Mr. Calder, Miss Naylin." "Got mail for you." Rhett took the bundle, confused. "We don't get mail." "You do now. Word spread about what happened here. These started arriving yesterday, more this morning. Mr. Kendrick said I should bring them out." The letters were from all over the territory, some from women who'd heard the story and wanted to offer support, others from men who'd faced similar pressure to conform, a few from families who'd experienced exile or rejection for breaking from tradition. One letter, written in a careful hand, stood out. It was from Mary Sykes. "Mr. Calder, Miss Naylin, my husband left me yesterday. Said I'd embarrassed him by speaking up at the council meeting. I'm staying with my sister now, trying to figure out what comes next. But I wanted you to know that watching you stand your ground gave me courage to stand mine. I don't know what my life looks like now, but at least it's mine. Thank you for showing me that was possible. Respectfully, Mary Sykes." Nalin read the letter twice, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We didn't just survive. We showed someone else they could." "Looks like your grandmother was right," Rhett said. "The one who refuses the chain teaches others to see chains." More letters came over the following days. Some were supportive, others condemnatory, a few threatening. But each one, regardless of its tone, proved the same point: what happened at the ranch mattered beyond the ranch. Their choice to live on their own terms had become a story people told, a possibility people considered. The town's attitude shifted gradually, not acceptance exactly, but a grudging tolerance. Shopkeepers still served them, though some did it with tight lips and disapproving eyes. The church ladies still whispered, but the whispers lost their venom as weeks passed without scandal or sin manifesting. Rhett kept working the ranch. Nalin kept working beside him, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I and you became we. One evening, about a month after the confrontation with Voss, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The fence was mended, the barn roof patched the vegetable garden, showing its first green shoots. "Rhett," Nalin said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what do you see when you look at this place now?" "What do you mean?" "When I first came here, this was your ranch, your home, your life. What is it now?" He thought about it, watching the light shift across the land he'd worked for years. "Now it's ours. Not mine, not yours, ours. The difference matters." "Yes," she agreed. "It does." A wire twanged in the distance, probably just the wind, possibly something more. They both tensed hands, moving toward weapons. They now kept close, a habit born of necessity and maintained through caution. But the sound didn't repeat. Whatever had caused it was gone or had never been a threat at all. False alarm, Rhett said, relaxing. This time, Nalin added, there'll be real ones eventually. There always are. I know, but we'll handle them, together. She smiled at that, the kind of smile that had become more frequent as safety became more real. Together, she agreed. I'm still getting used to that word, to the idea that together doesn't mean owned or controlled or obligated. What does it mean? It means two people choosing the same direction while keeping their own feet. It means backup without surrender. It means... She paused, searching for the right words. It means I can be strong without being alone, and you can be protective without being possessive. That's new for me, new for us both, maybe. Definitely new, Rhett confirmed, but I like it. As darkness settled, they moved inside. Rhett started a fire while Nalin set out the evening meal. The domestic routine felt earned now, not assumed. Each task done together, each space shared but not imposed upon. Later, as Nalin prepared for bed and Rhett checked the doors one final time, she called out from across the room. Rhett, do you remember what I said that first night about not being able to live without a man? I remember. I've been thinking about those words, about how you heard what I meant instead of what I said. She rolled her chair to where she could see him clearly. I can live without a man. I proved that by surviving exile, but I don't want to live without this man, without you. There's a difference there, too. Rhett felt his throat tighten. Yeah, there is. I just wanted you to know that you're not here out of my necessity. You're here out of my choice, and that matters. It matters. He agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't try to hide. It matters more than most things. They said their good nights, and Rhett settled onto his bedroll on the floor, the same arrangement they'd maintained since the beginning, respecting boundaries even as their connection deepened. But something had shifted tonight, some acknowledgement that what they'd built was real and chosen and worth naming. Outside, a coyote called. The wire fence sang in the wind. The desert breathed its eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama, but somehow witness to it all the same. And inside the small ranch house, two people who'd found each other against all odds and all opposition slept the sleep of those who'd fought for their right to rest. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own small battles and quiet victories. But tonight they'd won something worth keeping, the freedom to choose each other day after day without apology or explanation. Just choice, pure and simple and endlessly renewable. The rain returned before dawn, gentle this time, more blessing than deluge. It washed over the ranch like absolution, settling dust and feeding roots, and promising that even in the desert growth was possible if you were patient enough to wait for it. Rhett woke to the sound and lay still, listening. Beside him, not literally beside, but in the room. In his life, Nalin's breathing was steady and peaceful. The sound of someone finally truly safe. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to her, about not letting walls define him. He'd kept that promise, though not in any way he'd expected. The walls were still there, would always be there in some form, but now they marked boundaries instead of prisons, protecting what mattered instead of isolating him from everything that did. Tomorrow they'd wake and work and face whatever came. They'd build and mend and stand their ground when standing was required. They'd live lives that were their own, chosen, freely, defended fiercely. And if the world had a problem with that, well, the world would just have to adjust. The seasons turned as they always did, indifferent to human struggle and triumph alike. Spring brought wildflowers that painted the desert in unexpected colors, purple lupine, golden poppies, scarlet paintbrush. Nalin spent hours studying them, learning which were medicinal, which were simply beautiful, which were both. She was in the garden one morning, her chair positioned beside a raised bed Rhett had built to her exact specifications, when she heard the approach of horses, not the aggressive thunder of before, but the measured pace of people with legitimate business. "Rhett," she called, not alarmed but cautious. He emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his hands, and shaded his eyes against the morning sun. Two riders approached. One was Marshal Blackwood, recognizable even at a distance by his distinctive gray hat. The other was unfamiliar, dressed in the formal style of someone from the territorial capital. "Marshal," Rhett greeted as they dismounted. "Wasn't expecting you. Mr. Calder, Miss Nayland." Blackwood's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "This here is Judge Nathaniel Crawford from Santa Fe. He's been conducting inquiries into the Voss situation." Crawford was a man in his 50s, lean and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who'd seen enough of life to be surprised by very little. He approached the porch where Nayland waited and removed his hat respectfully. "Miss Nayland, Mr. Calder, I apologize for the intrusion, but I have news that concerns you both." "Bad news?" Nayland asked, her hand unconsciously moving toward her knife. "That depends on your perspective." Crawford pulled a folded document from his coat. "Josiah Voss was arrested 3 weeks ago in Kansas. Seems he tried to run a similar scheme there, intimidating a widow into selling her land cheap using his former position as leverage. The widow's son was a lawyer. Things didn't go well for Mr. Voss." Rhett felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "He in jail for the foreseeable future, but that's not why I'm here." Crawford unfolded the document. "During the investigation, we discovered that Deputy Voss had been systematically abusing his authority for years. Extortion, intimidation, accepting bribes to ignore crimes. The list is extensive and damning." "And Dry Creek?" Nayland asked quietly. "Several prominent citizens have been implicated, not criminally necessarily, but their involvement in Voss's activities has been noted." Crawford's expression was carefully neutral. "The town council has been dissolved pending new elections. Mayor Hargrove resigned, and there's been a significant shift in local sentiment regarding certain past events." "What kind of shift?" Rhett's voice was cautious. "The kind where people who supported Voss's actions are now very eager to distance themselves from those actions." Crawford looked between them. "I'm here because the new interim council wanted me to extend an official apology to you both, and to offer restitution for the harassment you endured." The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. Nayland found her voice first. "Restitution? They think money fixes what they did." "No, ma'am, I don't believe they do. But acknowledgement of wrongdoing is a start, and monetary compensation is the legal mechanism we have." Crawford shifted his weight. "They're also prepared to issue a formal statement, recognizing your right to live as you choose without interference from town authorities." Rhett exchanged a glance with Nayland, seeing his own conflicted feelings mirrored in her expression. Vindication felt hollow when it came only because the man who'd wronged them had been caught wronging others. But it was something. "We'll need to discuss it," Nayland said finally. "Of course. Take your time." Crawford handed the document to Rhett. "The offer stands for 60 days. After that, the legal window closes and the matter is considered settled regardless." After Crawford and Blackwood left, Rhett and Nayland sat on the porch, the document between them like a bridge or a barrier, hard to say which. "What do you want to do?" Rhett asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to throw it back in their faces. Tell them their apology means nothing. Their money means less." She was quiet for a moment. "But another part thinks about what we could do with that money. The ranch, the repairs, we've been putting off the improvements we've talked about." "It's not about the money for you, is it?" "No, it's about what accepting it means. Does it mean forgiving them, absolving them, saying what they did was okay, as long as they pay for it?" Rhett leaned back in his chair, watching clouds drift across the endless sky. "I think it means we get to decide what it means. They're offering compensation. We can take it and use it however we want. Doesn't obligate us to forget or forgive or pretend it didn't happen. You think we should accept? I think we should accept what's useful and ignore what's not. The money's useful. The apology," he shrugged, Words are cheap, actions matter. If the town's actions change, that'll mean something. If they don't, at least we'll have cash to make this place more secure. Nalin considered this, her fingers drumming a slow rhythm on her chair's arm. Finally, she nodded. All right, we accept, but on our terms with our understanding of what it means, which is that we survived despite them, not because of them, that we built something they tried to destroy, and that their belated recognition doesn't change the fact that we were right and they were wrong from the start. I can live with that, Rhett said. The restitution, when it came, was substantial enough to rebuild the barn properly, replace the aging windmill, and put in a real irrigation system for the garden. But more valuable than the money was what followed: a slow, grudging shift in how Dry Creek treated them. The shopkeepers stopped whispering when they entered. The church lady's disapproval mellowed into mere coolness. Young Tommy Brennan started making regular deliveries, often staying to learn carpentry from Rhett or medicine from Nalin. Other young people followed, boys and girls, both drawn by the novelty of a place where competence mattered more than convention. One afternoon, Mary Sykes rode out to the ranch. She'd changed since Rhett last saw her, thinner but somehow stronger, like she'd been refined by hardship into something more essential. Miss Nalin, Mr. Calder, she dismounted with practiced ease. I hope I'm not intruding. Never, Nalin said, rolling forward to greet her. How are you, Mary? Getting by. My sister's been kind, letting me stay while I figure out my next step. She glanced around the ranch, taking in the improvements. I heard about the restitution, about the town's apology. How does it feel? Complicated, Rhett admitted. Like winning a fight nobody should have started in the first place. Mary nodded slowly. I know the feeling. My husband's family keeps saying they're sorry for how things turned out. Like it just turned out that, like nobody made choices that led here. She looked at Nalin. I came because I wanted to ask, would you teach me? Teach you what? Whatever you know. Medicine, survival, how to be strong without a man telling you you're allowed. Mary's voice was earnest, almost desperate. I'm 28 years old, and I just realized I don't know how to do anything except clean and cook and make myself small. I want to learn to take up space, to matter. Nalin was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that held both sadness for what was lost and hope for what could be built. Come back tomorrow morning. Bring clothes you don't mind getting dirty and a willingness to fail before you succeed. I can do that, Mary said, relief washing over her features. And Mary, Nalin's voice stopped her as she was mounting. You already matter. You already take up space. We're just going to help you see it. Mary became a regular presence at the ranch, arriving at dawn 3 days a week to learn everything Nalin could teach. Other women followed, some from town, some from neighboring ranches, one from as far as the territorial capital, who'd heard the story and wanted to meet the woman who'd chosen exile over submission. The ranch, slowly and without anyone quite planning it, became something more than a home. It became a refuge, a place where women could learn that strength came in forms beyond marriage and motherhood. That survival was a skill that could be taught, that choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Rhett watched this transformation with something like awe. The woman he'd found dying in the desert had become a teacher, a leader, someone others looked to for guidance. And she'd done it without softening her edges, without making herself more palatable, without apologizing for taking up the space she'd earned. One evening, after the last of the day's visitors had left, Rhett found Nalin at her workbench working on a new leather journal. Her hands moved with confident precision, the awl punching holes in perfect rhythm. You're building something, he observed. We're building something, she corrected. You think I could do this without you holding the space for it to happen? You'd find a way. You always do. She set down her tools and looked at him properly. Maybe. But I shouldn't have to. That's the point, isn't it? That we're stronger together than apart, not because one of us is weak, but because partnership multiplies strength instead of dividing it. When did you get so wise? I was always this wise. You just weren't listening at first. but she smiled as she said it, taking the sting out. Rhett pulled up a chair and sat beside her. You ever think about what comes next after we've built whatever this is we're building? Every day, but I try not to plan too far ahead. Plans assume you control the future. I prefer to prepare for it instead. What's the difference? Plans break when circumstances change. Preparation adapts. She returned to her leatherwork, her hands steady and sure. We prepare by getting stronger, by teaching others, by building something that can outlast us. When trouble comes, and it will, we'll be ready. When opportunity comes, and it will, we'll be ready for that too. The trouble came sooner than expected, but not in the form they'd anticipated. It was late summer when a young Apache woman arrived at the ranch riding a paint horse and carrying herself with the careful dignity of someone on uncertain ground. She stopped at the property line and called out in Apache. Nalin's face went carefully blank. She responded in the same language, her tone neutral, but not unfriendly. The conversation went back and forth for several minutes before the visitor dismounted and approached slowly. This is Casa, Nalin told Rhett, switching to English. She's from my former tribe. She says she needs help. Casa was young, maybe 18, with fresh bruises on her face and arms. She spoke in rapid Apache, and Nalin translated with growing anger. She was married last month to a man twice her age. He beats her. She tried to refuse the marriage, but the elders said she had no choice. Her family needed the alliance. Nalin's jaw tightened. She heard about me, about the woman who chose exile over submission. She wants to know if the stories are true, and if they are, if I can help her do the same. Rhett felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. They'd fought for their own right to choose their own freedom to exist outside the rules that bound others. Now someone was asking them to extend that same opportunity, to turn their survival into something larger. What did you tell her? He asked. I said the stories are true. I said exile is hard, but it's honest. I said freedom costs everything and gives back more. Nalin looked at Casa, seeing herself in the younger woman's desperate hope. And I said she'd have to choose for herself. Nobody can choose freedom for you. You have to claim it. Casa spoke again, her voice urgent. Nalin's response was gentler, more compassionate. Finally, Casa nodded and remounted her horse. What did she say? Rhett asked as the young woman rode away. She said she needs time to think. That choosing exile means losing everything she's ever known, family, identity, belonging. It means becoming no one so she can become herself. Nalin watched Casa disappear into the distance. She said she'll return in 3 days with her answer. Those 3 days were tense with waiting. Nalin was quieter than usual, her mind clearly elsewhere. Rhett gave her space while staying close, ready to listen if she needed to talk. On the 3rd day, Casa returned, but she wasn't alone. Elder Gray Fox rode beside her, and behind them came 2 other tribal members, one of the matriarchs from Nalin's exile ceremony, and a younger warrior Rhett didn't recognize. They stopped at the property line, and Gray Fox dismounted with the careful movements of age. They've come to take her back, Nalin said quietly, fear creeping into her voice for the first time in months. They've come to prove that escape isn't possible. But when Gray Fox spoke, his words surprised them both. Nalin's translation came slowly, disbelief coloring each word. He says Casa spoke to the elders, told them about me, about what I'd built here. Some wanted to punish her for even asking about exile, but the matriarch, my grandmother's sister, she spoke in Casa's defense. Nalin's voice caught. She said the tribe had lost too many strong women to the fear of strength. She said it was time to change. Change how? Rhett asked. Gray Fox spoke again, and this time the matriarch joined him, her voice carrying authority that came from years of surviving in a world that tried to silence her. They're offering a new path. Nalin translated wonder creeping into her voice. Not exile, but choice. Women who refuse marriage will no longer be punished. They can remain in the tribe as unmarried with the same rights as widows. or they can leave with blessing instead of curse, with supplies and support instead of whipping and abandonment. Because of you, Rhett asked, because enough people saw what I survived and wondered if survival should require that much sacrifice. Nalin rolled forward, addressing the delegation directly in Apache. The conversation that followed was long, intense, full of questions and clarifications and careful negotiation. Finally, Grey Fox nodded and spoke a formal phrase. The matriarch added her own words, then placed her hand on Casa's shoulder in a gesture that was clearly benediction. "It's done," Nalin said after they'd ridden away, Casa staying behind by her own choice to learn what Nalin could teach. The tribe has changed its law, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. Because seeing one woman survive impossible odds made them question whether the odds needed to be impossible in the first place. Rhett felt emotion swell in his chest. Pride, relief, vindication, joy, all tangled together in a knot too complex to name. "You changed the world. We changed our corner of it," Nalin corrected. "One choice at a time, one person at a time, one impossible thing made possible at a time." Casa stayed at the ranch for 2 months, learning everything Nalin and Rhett could teach her about survival, about medicine, about building a life on your own terms. Other young women came, some Apache, some white, some Mexican, all carrying the same hunger for something beyond what they'd been told to want. The ranch expanded to accommodate them. Rhett built additional sleeping quarters, expanded the garden, created workspaces for different skills. Nalin organized the teaching, making sure every woman learned not just practical skills, but the deeper lesson that they were worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth becoming. One evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Rhett and Nalin sat on the porch watching their strange community go about its evening routines. Mary was teaching 3 younger women how to treat wounds. Casa was working leather with a focus that reminded Rhett of Nalin. Others were tending the garden, preparing meals, fixing equipment, and all the small tasks that made life possible. "Remember when it was just us?" Rhett asked. "I remember when it was just you and I was a problem you didn't know how to solve," Nalin replied. "You were never a problem. You were a question I didn't know I'd been asking." She smiled at that. "And now you're the answer I didn't know I needed, along with all of this." He gestured at the bustling ranch. "We're not just surviving anymore, we're showing others how to thrive." "No," Nalin corrected gently. "We're showing others that thriving is possible. They're doing the actual thriving themselves. There's a difference." A rider appeared on the horizon, a familiar silhouette that made Nalin stiffen until she recognized Tommy Brennan's gangly form. The young man rode up with his usual enthusiasm, dismounting before his horse fully stopped. "Miss Nalin, Mr. Calder got news from town." "Good news or bad news?" Rhett asked. "Good. I think the new town council, they've voted to establish a school. A real school, not just the church teaching letters on Sundays. And they want Miss Nalin to teach there. Medicine, practical skills, all the things she's been teaching out here." Nalin's eyes widened. "They want me to teach in town." "Yes, ma'am. They said," and I'm quoting Councilman Reed here, "they said, 'The woman we tried to run out of town has proven herself the best teacher we could ask for. Time to stop being fools and start being students.'" The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The town that had tried to exile Nalin, that had threatened her and demanded her removal, now wanted her expertise, her knowledge, her presence. "What do you think?" Rhett asked quietly. "I think it's proof that people can change if you give them reason to," Nalin said slowly. "I think it's an opportunity to reach more people, to plant more seeds." She paused. "But I also think I need to be careful. Trust once broken isn't easily rebuilt." "You don't have to decide now," Rhett pointed out. "No, but I should decide soon." She looked at Tommy. "Tell the council I'll consider it. I'll give them my answer in a week." After Tommy left, the evening settled into thoughtful quiet. Nalin wheeled herself to the edge of the porch, looking out at the desert that had witnessed so much of her transformation. "If I teach in town," she said finally, "I'd be going back to the place that tried to destroy me, but I'd be going back on my terms, with my power intact to help shape the next generation. There's poetry in that. There's also risk," Rhett reminded her. "There's always risk. The question is whether the potential good outweighs it." They sat with that question as the stars emerged one by one, filling the sky with ancient light. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and another answered. The desert breathed its eternal rhythm, and the ranch, their creation, their impossible dream made real, hummed with life and purpose. After a week of consideration, Nalin gave her answer to the town council, yes, but with conditions. She would teach, but she would teach what she deemed important, not what made them comfortable. She would include women and girls who'd been excluded from other educational opportunities, and she would continue her work at the ranch, making the school a complement to what she'd built, not a replacement for it. The council agreed to everything. The school opened in September in a building that had once been a warehouse. Nalin taught 3 days a week, covering medicine, practical mathematics, survival skills, and the kind of critical thinking that taught students to question assumptions rather than accept them blindly. The first day she arrived to find her classroom packed not just with children, but with adults of all ages. Men and women, ranch hands and shop owners, people who'd supported her and people who'd opposed her, all sitting together with the shared hunger for knowledge. She positioned her chair at the front of the room and looked at the assembled faces. Some were friendly, some neutral, some still carried traces of the old prejudice, but they were all there, all willing to learn, and that was enough. "My name is Nalin," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It means the one who keeps breathing. I was given this name by my grandmother when I was exiled from my tribe, meant to survive alone in a world that wanted me dead." She paused, letting that sink in. "I kept breathing. More than that, I learned to live. And now I'm going to teach you how to do the same, not just to survive, but to thrive, regardless of what circumstances try to tell you is possible." The teaching became another transformation. Students who came for practical skills stayed for the deeper lessons about dignity, choice, and the courage to build lives that reflected their values rather than others' expectations. Word spread beyond Dry Creek, beyond the territory. Letters arrived from women across the West, asking questions, seeking advice, sharing their own stories of survival and transformation. Nalin answered each one personally, her responses practical and encouraging in equal measure. 2 years after Rhett found Nalin dying in the desert, the ranch had become something neither of them could have imagined: a school, a refuge, a living example of what was possible when people chose dignity over convention. The changes weren't just external. Rhett and Nalin's partnership had deepened into something that transcended easy definition. They weren't married, had consciously chosen not to be, refusing to legitimize their relationship through an institution that so often meant ownership rather than partnership. But they were bound together in ways that mattered more than legal documents. One evening, as they sat in their usual spots on the porch, Nalin spoke into the comfortable silence. "Do you remember what I said that first night about not being able to live without a man?" "I remember," Rhett said. "I was wrong. I can live without a man. I proved that, but I don't want to live without you." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "Not because I need you, but because choosing you every day makes my life richer, makes me better. That's not dependence, that's partnership." "I feel the same," Rhett said simply. "You came into my life when I'd convinced myself that surviving was enough. You showed me the difference between existing and living, between walls that protect and walls that imprison." "We showed each other," Nalin corrected. "Yeah, we did." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of what the world had tried to make them. The seasons continued their turn. Students graduated from Nalen's classes and went on to teach others. The ranch continued to grow, continued to evolve, continued to be a place where impossible things became possible through the simple act of refusing to accept limitations as fate. Mary Sykes eventually left to start her own venture, a boarding house for women escaping bad situations, funded in part by the restitution money Nalen had shared with her. Casa returned to her tribe, but this time as a teacher and healer, welcomed back with the honor she'd been denied before. And through it all, Rhett and Nalen remained not as savior and saved, not as protector and protected, but as partners. Two people who'd learned that the strongest bonds were those chosen, freely maintained through mutual respect, and deepened through shared purpose. 5 years to the day after Rhett found Nalen in the desert, they stood together at the ranch fence line, watching the sun rise over land they'd transformed through sheer, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "You know what I realized," Nalen said, her hair silver-streaked now, but her spirit undiminished. "That first thing I said to you about not being able to live without a man, it wasn't about needing a man at all. No, it was about needing to be seen as fully human, needing someone to recognize my worth without trying to own it, to offer support without demanding submission, to stand with me without standing over me." She smiled, and I could have said I can't live without humanity, but that would have been less poetic. "And less accurate," Rhett added, "because not everyone knows how to be human. Most people are just playing at it, following scripts written by others. But not us. No, not us." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their strange, beautiful creation wake to a new day. Students would arrive soon for morning lessons. Women seeking refuge would come seeking guidance. The work would continue as it always did, endless and essential, and chosen freely every day. "Home isn't who keeps you," Nalen said quietly, echoing words she'd spoken years ago. "It's who lets you stand." "And who stands with you," Rhett added. "Yes, who stands with you." The sun cleared the horizon, painting everything gold. The ranch, their home, their impossible dream made real, seemed to breathe with possibility. The work they'd started would continue long after they were gone, carried forward by the people they'd taught, the lives they'd touched. The simple revolutionary idea they'd embodied, that dignity was a right, not a privilege, and that choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Rhett took Nalen's hand, and she squeezed back a simple gesture that contained years of struggle, triumph, partnership, and love. Not the romantic love of storybooks, but something deeper and more enduring, the love of two souls who'd recognized each other in the darkness and chosen every day to walk toward the light together. "You ready for another day?" he asked. "I'm ready for another lifetime," she replied. "But we'll start with today." And as the desert bloomed around them, impossible flowers in impossible soil, thriving against all odds, they turned together toward the house, toward the work, toward the life they'd built from nothing but choice and courage, and the stubborn refusal to let the world tell them who they had to be. They'd survived. More than that, they'd shown others how to survive. And in doing so, they'd turned survival into something greater, a legacy of dignity, a testament to choice, a living example, that even in the harshest desert, even in the most impossible circumstances, life, real, chosen, meaningful life, could not just exist, but flourish. The story that had begun with a woman dying in the desert ended with a community thriving in it. And at its heart always were two people who'd learned that the most revolutionary act of all was simply this: choosing yourself, choosing each other, and building something beautiful from the freedom those choices made possible. Home wasn't who kept you, it was who let you stand, and who chose every day to stand beside you. That was enough. That was everything.